No gun was pulled, no warning was sent, no threat was spoken out loud. And yet on that day, Lucky Luciano was already a dead man, not because someone hated him, not because he'd lost a war, but because 3 families had reached the same conclusion at the same time, quietly, independently, and without ever sitting in the same room. Lucky didn't feel it immediately. That was the most dangerous part. The streets still moved. The money still flowed. His name still carried weight. On the surface, nothing had changed. But underneath, something critical had shifted. Conversations ended faster than usual. Meetings were postponed without explanation. Familiar faces stopped appearing where they always had. No one said no to Lucky, they simply stopped saying yes. In the world Lucky built, that kind of silence was never accidental. The commission was supposed to prevent this. It was designed to stop impulsive hits, to replace vendettas with structure, to make murder inefficient. But the same system that stabilized the underworld had also done something else. It had made Lucky untouchable for too long, and eventually that became the problem. 3 families, each for their own reasons, decided that Lucky was no longer an asset. He was a bottleneck. A man who controlled outcomes without pulling triggers. A man who could end careers with a vote instead of a bullet. They didn't want chaos. They wanted removal. There would be no public hit, no dramatic ambush, just an empty moment where protection quietly disappeared. Because in that world, you don't always kill a man by shooting him. Sometimes you kill him by making sure no one steps in when the shooting starts. Lucky sensed something was off, but not enough to act. Not yet. He'd survived betrayals before, survived wars, survived exile. He believed he could read danger before it reached him. What he didn't know was that this time, danger wasn't approaching loudly. It was waiting, and if one man, just one, hadn't chosen to break the most dangerous rule in organized crime, Lucky Luciano would have walked into a moment he never walked out of. The irony was brutal. Lucky Luciano wasn't marked for death because he was reckless. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't losing control. In fact, he was doing exactly what he'd always promised he would do. He was keeping the peace, and that's precisely why 3 families decided he had to go. When Lucky helped design the commission, he didn't just end wars. He changed the math of power. Bosses who once ruled by fear now had to negotiate. Decisions that used to be settled with bullets were trapped inside meetings, votes, and compromises. For the first time, ambition had a ceiling. At first, everyone benefited. Money flowed more predictably. Police pressure dropped. Bloodshed slowed. The streets were calmer, profits steadier. On paper, it was a success, but power doesn't disappear when it's restrained. It accumulates resentment. One family felt boxed in financially. Their expansion plans were blocked, not by rivals, but by procedure. They had soldiers, territory, leverage, yet every move stalled at the commission table. Lucky didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply said no. Another family saw something worse. Not loss of money, but loss of future. The next generation had no clear path upward. Bosses weren't falling anymore. Vacancies weren't opening. Lucky's system preserved stability so well that it froze opportunity. The 3rd family feared irrelevance. They were old power, used to unilateral decisions, used to respect that came from reputation alone. Under Lucky's structure, respect had to be maintained, not assumed. Influence had to be justified every time. And they were losing that argument more often than they were winning it. 3 families, 3 different frustrations, one shared conclusion. Lucky wasn't dangerous because he was violent. Lucky was dangerous because he couldn't be challenged openly. You couldn't accuse him of breaking rules. He wrote them. You couldn't rally support against him. The system favored consensus. You couldn't move fast around him. He slowed everything down on purpose. And that's when the thinking changed. Not how do we beat Lucky, but what happens if Lucky isn't there? Without him, votes would splinter. Without him, deals would be renegotiated. Without him, old instincts could return. The key detail is this. None of the families wanted a war. They didn't want chaos. They didn't want headlines. They wanted removal without responsibility. Lucky's death wouldn't be a statement. It would be a correction. And in their minds, the cleanest corrections are the ones no one admits to making. So the decision wasn't shouted. It wasn't written down. It wasn't even confirmed out loud. It simply spread, one quiet understanding at a time, that when the moment came, Lucky would stand alone. And in that world, standing alone is the same as being dead. What made the plan lethal wasn't coordination. It was absence. There was no meeting where 3 families sat around a table and voted on Lucky Luciano's death. No emissaries, no signatures, no shared hit team. That kind of organization would have left fingerprints. And fingerprints create liability. Instead, something more dangerous happened. They all stopped acting. Protection that used to be automatic quietly thinned out. Information that once traveled fast began arriving late, or not at all. Doors that were always open became not today. No one said Lucky was finished. They just stopped behaving like he mattered. In the underworld, that shift is unmistakable. When a man loses favor, he hears about it. When a man loses respect, he feels it. But when a man loses protection, no one tells him, because the point is that he finds out too late. Lucky sensed the pattern before he could explain it. Meetings were postponed without reason. Allies who once returned calls within minutes now took hours. Familiar intermediaries claimed they were out of town, busy, handling something else. Each excuse was plausible. Together, they formed a wall. This wasn't hostility, it was withdrawal. And withdrawal is how power isolates a target without firing a shot. Each family made the same internal calculation. If something happened to Lucky, they wouldn't be blamed, because they hadn't ordered it. They also wouldn't intervene, because intervention would mean choosing sides. All they had to do was remain neutral at exactly the wrong moment. Neutrality weaponized. The brilliance of the silence was that it solved every problem at once. No one risked exposure. No one carried guilt. No one broke the rules. And yet the outcome was the same as if they had all agreed. Lucky alone. A window of vulnerability. An ending that looked like fate. That's why this method worked so often. The streets don't punish men for staying quiet. They punish men for being loud at the wrong time. Lucky had designed the commission to prevent this kind of thing, to make unilateral action impossible. But the system had a flaw he couldn't legislate away. Inaction isn't a violation. No rule required anyone to protect him. No rule forced anyone to warn him. No rule punished indifference. And so the mechanism turned inward. By the time Lucky fully understood what the silence meant, the machinery was already in motion. Not gears turning loudly, but doors staying closed, phones staying unanswered, men choosing not to be present when presence mattered most. The agreement wasn't written. It didn't need to be, because when 3 families independently decide to look the other way at the same time, the result is indistinguishable from a death sentence. And Lucky was walking closer to the moment when looking the other way would become irreversible. The plan didn't unravel because someone panicked. It unraveled because one man heard the same thing 3 different times. He wasn't a boss. He wasn't a shooter. He wasn't important enough to be feared. That was why people talked around him. He sat at the edges of conversations, arranging logistics, passing messages, smoothing over misunderstandings. The kind of man everyone trusted with details but never suspected of influence. And because he moved between circles, he heard patterns before anyone else noticed them. From one family, he heard a casual remark, "If something happens, don't get involved." From another, a warning disguised as indifference, "Not our problem anymore." From the third, a sentence that froze him in place, "When it goes down, no one steps in." None of them said Lucky Luciano's name. They didn't need to. In that world, you don't say a man's name when his fate has already been decided. You refer to him as a condition, an inconvenience, a situation resolving itself. By the third conversation, the man understood something dangerous. This wasn't gossip. It wasn't frustration. It wasn't posturing. It was convergence. 3 families who rarely agreed on anything had independently chosen the same outcome. And they had done it the safest way possible, by ensuring that when the moment came, no one would interfere. The man also understood the other half of the equation. If Lucky died, the silence would hold. If Lucky lived, someone had spoken, and whoever spoke would be hunted first. That was the trap. Warning Lucky meant placing yourself outside every protection network at once. It meant being labeled untrustworthy by all sides. The kiss of death in a business built on selective loyalty. He spent a sleepless night weighing the options. Say nothing, and Lucky walks into an ambush blind. The system resets, new alliances form, and no one ever knows there was a chance to stop it. Say something and you might not live long enough to regret it. What tipped the scale wasn't friendship, it wasn't money, it wasn't ideology. It was foresight. The man realized that if Lucky disappeared quietly, the commission wouldn't fracture. It would harden. The families would learn that silence works, that you don't need votes or wars or orders. You just need everyone to look away at the same time. And once that lesson was learned, no one would ever be safe again. Not bosses, not intermediaries, not men like him. So he made a decision that broke the most dangerous rule in organized crime. He chose to interfere. Not loudly, not directly, not in a way that could be traced. He wouldn't confront anyone. He wouldn't argue. He wouldn't expose the plan. He would simply make sure that one man, the man everyone had decided to abandon, didn't walk into death without knowing it was waiting. And in doing so, he accepted a truth he never said out loud. If Lucky lived, he would disappear. The warning wasn't dramatic. There was no late-night knock, no frantic phone call, no whispered confession in a dark car. That would have been suicide. Instead, the message moved the way safe messages always do in that world. Indirectly, stripped of detail impossible to trace. It didn't come from the man himself. It came through someone Lucky trusted just enough not to ignore. A routine interaction. Nothing urgent, nothing suspicious, and buried inside it, a sentence that didn't belong. You might want to stay put, just for a bit. No names, no reasons, no explanation. If Lucky had been younger, he might have laughed it off. If he'd been more paranoid, he might have demanded answers. But Lucky Luciano had survived long enough to recognize a very specific kind of warning. The kind that doesn't want to be remembered. Warnings like that aren't meant to convince. They're meant to interrupt, to break routine, to force hesitation. And hesitation in that business is often the difference between life and death. Lucky didn't respond, didn't acknowledge it, didn't ask for clarification. That alone told the messenger everything he needed to know. Instead of confronting anyone, Lucky did something far more telling. He changed nothing publicly. No alerts, no sudden security surge, no visible panic. He kept appointments on paper, spoke normally, acted undisturbed. Privately, everything shifted. Routes were altered at the last minute. Meetings were quietly postponed. Places he was expected to appear, he simply didn't. From the outside, it looked like coincidence. From the inside, it was discipline. Because Lucky understood the rule better than anyone. If a warning is vague, the danger is real. Specific threats come from loud men. Vague ones come from men who don't want credit for saving you. Hours passed, then a day. Somewhere else, men waited for Lucky to arrive where he always arrived. They waited at the right time, in the right place, with no backup plan. And Lucky never showed. No call, no delay, no excuse, just absence. That's when the truth became unavoidable. Someone had talked, not loudly, not foolishly, but enough. The plan collapsed without confrontation. There was no second attempt, no correction, because whatever window had existed was gone. And reopening it would require asking questions no one wanted answered. Lucky didn't celebrate. He didn't relax. He didn't move against anyone. Because surviving the moment wasn't the victory. Understanding why it happened, and choosing not to expose the man who stopped it, was. And the man who sent that warning knew the cost immediately. Lucky lived, which meant the silence around the warning would now be permanent. By the time Lucky Luciano was certain the danger had passed, he still didn't know who had warned him. And he made sure he never found out. That decision was deliberate. In that world, survival wasn't about exposing enemies. It was about not forcing the next move. If Lucky started asking questions, names would surface. And once names surfaced, the man who broke the silence would be dead within days. Lucky understood that better than anyone. So instead of reacting, he absorbed the lesson. He didn't retaliate. He didn't reshuffle alliances. He didn't confront the families who had quietly stepped away from him. Because doing any of that would confirm the plan had existed. And the smartest way to neutralize a secret agreement is to pretend it never mattered. Lucky returned to visibility slowly, predictably, on purpose. He showed up again, but not the same way. The old routines were gone. The habits people relied on to predict his movements disappeared. Appearances became irregular. Schedules loosened. Everything that could be mapped was broken. The men who had waited for him once didn't wait again. They didn't know if the warning would happen twice. They didn't know if silence would protect them again. And uncertainty is poison to coordination. Behind the scenes, the three families recalculated. Not because Lucky struck back, but because he didn't. No accusations meant no proof. No proof meant no leverage. And the longer Lucky remained alive without explanation, the more dangerous the situation became for anyone who had quietly hoped he wouldn't be. If Lucky was still standing, someone had chosen him over silence. And that meant the system wasn't as airtight as they believed. The man who warned Lucky paid the price anyway, just not with a bullet. His name stopped circulating. His access narrowed. He was no longer included where decisions were shaped. He lived, but he was erased. That was the compromise the underworld always preferred. Lucky knew this, and that's why he never tried to repay the debt, because repayment would expose the debt. Instead, Lucky did something far colder and far more effective. He made sure there was never another moment where three families could quietly agree to remove him again. He tightened the structure, clarified boundaries, reduced ambiguity, not with force, but with presence. The commission didn't fracture. The families didn't rebel. But the silence never aligned that way again. Lucky didn't survive because he was untouchable. He survived because one man disrupted the silence, and Lucky respected the disruption enough to let it remain invisible. In a business where everyone listens for noise, Lucky learned the final rule. The most dangerous threats don't announce themselves, and the most valuable warnings never explain. Lucky Luciano never spoke about that day. Not in meetings, not in prison, not years later when stories usually grow teeth. Because acknowledging it would have done the one thing he refused to do: expose the man who broke the silence. Three families had decided Lucky would die by indifference. No shooters to blame, no orders to trace. Just a moment when no one would step forward. And that plan failed for the simplest, most dangerous reason imaginable. One person chose to speak, not loudly, not publicly, not in a way that could be repeated. Just enough to interrupt fate. Lucky understood the cost of that choice immediately. He didn't seek gratitude. He didn't offer protection. He didn't ask questions. In that world, protection attracts attention, and attention kills. The safest reward was anonymity, the kind that erases a man from history while letting him keep his life. And so Lucky did what only someone who truly understands power would do. He let the silence stand. No retaliation meant no confirmation. No investigation meant no trail. No gratitude meant no motive. The three families backed away without admitting anything. The system corrected itself without violence. And the lesson settled into the underworld like a law no one ever wrote down. You can kill a man with guns. You can kill him with betrayal. But sometimes the most effective weapon is silence, and the bravest act is breaking it once. Lucky Luciano didn't survive because he was the strongest man in the room. He survived because, at the exact moment silence became a death sentence, one person refused to participate, and that's why no one ever tried it again.